Well, shooters and reloaders out there, it's Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the hot lead zone express. Well, today's video is talking about the FreeBore and also the Leade in a rifle. And some of the features of those that we haven't given a lot of thought to. What you see here are 4.58 Winchester Magnum rounds. And look at the seating depth. This looks pretty normal, right? That looks pretty normal. That could be okay, but there's something wrong about these two because they're sticking out so far. This is the bullet, so you see it's only on the last driving band, or maybe right on the driving band, the first grease groove down here, but there's only the first driving band. That's what that bullet's crimped on. Not a whole lot of bullet in the case. How does that work? Well, it's part of the discussion today. To give you an idea, here's a 45 Colt round compared to all those 458 Magnums. So look at this. If you only seat that much of the bullet in the case, look at all that powder space. Normally that bullet's seated to that level right there. So you're gaining more than 3/10 of an inch of powder space. You're gaining almost a ½ inch. So why would anyone need a 458 lot? Because your 458 Magnum, if you go ahead and load it like this, you got more powder space than the 458 lot. How does that work? Well, this happens to be my Winchester Model 70 African rifle in 458 Winchester Magnum caliber. And the reason why it's in this video is because this is one of the most perverse rifles that you'll ever see in terms of how the chamber behaves when you chamber around. It's not loaded, of course. Hark, do I hear an elephant? So this rifle is perfect to illustrate what's going on with the FreeBore and the Leade that's in front of the chamber where the neck ends. Where the neck ends, then there's a section of the barrel that's called the FreeBore, and that FreeBore is actually a cylindrical portion that is bigger than the groove diameter of the rifle. So, for instance, you got a 4.58 diameter groove diameter in this barrel, but the FreeBore might be somewhere around 0.460 or 461 in diameter. So it's bigger than the groove diameter of the barrel. And that FreeBore is a certain distance, doesn't have to be a lot, but it could be a lot more. And then what happens is, in front of the FreeBore is where the Leade begins, and the Leade is where the rifling starts, but not at the beginning of the Leade, because as you'll recall, the FreeBore, which is bigger than the groove diameter, extends a certain distance, and therefore the Leade starts to taper down a little bit until it reaches the groove diameter, and at that point in the Leade, that's where the rifling begins. But it doesn't begin abruptly in rifles. It begins with a small taper that begins with zero rifling. And as that Leade progresses, the rifling becomes more pronounced until it reaches full dimension of the rifling, which oftentimes is 0.03 of an inch deep. And so your groove diameter is reached with a taper in the Leade until it comes down to groove diameter. So you actually have a forcing cone there. And a lot of us don't realize that there is a forcing cone in rifles. But that's it. You got forcing cones also in shotguns, and you also have forcing cones in revolvers. But in automatic pistols, the rifling oftentimes is very abrupt. There's a very short taper where the rifling begins ahead of the chamber, where the neck hits that shoulder in there. but you've got a little bit of a lead there too. But it's usually only a very small amount. In rifles, the lead can be more extended. And so the taper of the rifling is often only 1 or 2 degrees. And when it reaches the full width of the rifling, that's where the lead stops and the barrel takes over. From there on. You have a groove diameter, say of 458, and then you have a bore diameter that's more like 450 or 452, somewhere around there, depending on the height of the rifling, which is anywhere from 6 thousandths to 8 thousandths, depending on the rifle. So there you have it. And in the 458 Winchester Magnum, they make the throat or FreeBore ridiculously long and the lead ridiculously long. It's crazy. Oftentimes in a rifle, we want to find the lens so that we can seat the bullet a certain distance off the lens. With the 458 Winchester Magnum, it's impossible to find that, because by the time you reach the lens where the ogive of the bullet hits the lens, you actually wind up with the bullet out of the case. Now, we oftentimes talk about the ogive of the bullet hitting the lens, but in actuality, a lot of times, the bullet actually hits the forcing cone, which is that section where the lead tapers down to begin the rifling. It actually hits that forcing cone first before the rifling even begins. So that depends on the ogive of the bullet too, of course. So we're really talking about at what point does the bullet in your rifle, whether it be a 308, a 223, whatever, 6.5 Creedmoor, a lot of it depends on actually where does the ogive of the bullet hit. It might hit the forcing cone. It might hit the actual beginning of the rifling. After that, might be very close to those two. Turns out with the 458 Magnum Winchester Model 70 that we might as well just go ahead and load our seating depth according to the magazine length, because the magazine length is 3.340, and you might as well use that as the limiting factor for seating the bullet, because as I said before, you cannot get the bullet to touch the lens anyway, it's so far out there. Give you an idea, this is an incredibly long cartridge. It's only seated and crimped on the first driving band down here. Almost the whole thing is powder space, and it's way longer than the magazine. But if you put the bullet into, by the way, it's a dummy round. There's no primer, there's no powder. Let's verify that again. Yep. So if you go ahead and place the bullet into the chamber first and then lower it down until a claw extractor can grab that, as you see there, you see? You got that. That long round will not jam into the rifling or the forcing cone because it's so far out there. Watch this. I'll go easy. There it is. That round is so long, but it will chamber easily. So that if you single feed that, you can have a cartridge that's more powerful than the 458 lot. So you might ask, well, why do they even bother with a FreeBore and the Leade and all that kind of thing? Because you hear about seating bullets anywhere from 20 thousandths off the lens to just off the lens to touching the lens to actually having bullets seated into the lens by a fair amount. You hear about that now being done. And is that safe? The FreeBore was never designed out of thin air. The reason the FreeBore is there is so that there's no resistance to the chambering of the cartridge. The bullet goes in without any resistance. But also when the round fires, that bullet doesn't have any resistance when it first starts moving. Because turns out that when the powder charge goes off, one of the things that happens with a bullet is that it starts to slug up immediately. The inertia of the bullet causes a little squashing effect that happens on the base, and it starts slugging up. Well, the problem is, if you get the bullet slugging up faster than it starts moving, you can have a barrel obstruction. And not only that, but when the bullet first hits the rifling, if it's slugging up too much, you can have a situation where you got a barrel obstruction. So it's all a question of safety. And these days, we're flirting with safety issues when we're seating bullets close to the lens. In the search for the wonderful throne of accuracy, we're doing all these things, but we're flirting with some danger there, because if we exceed the pressure spike and the bullet doesn't move enough to give us more powder space, then the pressures will start spiking. We can have a situation where you got a barrel obstruction. And then what happens is we depend on that bullet to actually get into the rifling and continue its movement. As the pressure is building up, that the spiking doesn't really happen, because if it happens, if the spike happens bad enough, it can exceed 100,000 psi, and at that point your gun blows up. So let's keep all these things in mind when we're doing our search for accuracy and all these things, that a bullet jump may not be a bad thing. We've always thought of bullet jump being a bad thing because it causes loss of accuracy. But let's not forget the bullet jump is really a good thing for safety. And that's one of the reasons why the .458 Winchester Magnum has such a real long FreeBore and long lead. Because when you chamber around and you're using these big bullets and everything, and an elephant is charging you, it wants to stomp you into the ground, or a Cape Buffalo wants to throw you in the air and then grind you into dust, that you need to have a rifle you can depend on for ultimate safety and ultimate reliability. And that's why the .458 Winchester Magnum has such a perverse FreeBore and lead. At any rate, this rifle is one of my prized possessions, and I don't mind it having that kind of thing. I don't need this rifle to be a bench rest rifle. I don't need this rifle to be a sandbag rifle. This rifle is intended to be shot offhand, and 3 inches at 50 yards, 6 inches at 100 yards is absolutely perfect, because it's not designed to do anything more than to hit a small pie plate reliably at distance when you really need it and the chips are down. So take care. See you in the next video. Bye for now.